Hello, interwebs, and welcome to the second episode of Conspiracy Synergy. I'm your host, T. Snyder. Welcome back to the show, and thank you for taking the time to delve into relevant, controversial themes. You know, controversy and conspiracy are it's tough work. You know, it's tough to dig through and to take the time to do, and so you should be proud of yourself for taking the time to do that because the world could use more people who know what they're doing that kind of work. So. Welcome back to the show. And today we're going to be talking about the depiction of revolution within Hollywood and by the mainstream media and like the news industry. And the reason I say the depiction of revolution is because a lot of the time the way in which revolutions are actually going on and what they're actually about isn't what's shown to us, or the way in which it's framed, or expressed, or contextualized, or presented, or misrepresented, or flat out fucking lied about, which is more often the case. Because revolution, ta-da, surprise, spoilers, is actually about healing and making things better, and it's really, if you get right down to it, the word revolution, evolution. Re-evolution. Evolution. That's the point. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're getting at. So all that violent bullshit, all that garbage theory, don't even bother with it. If it isn't making things better for absolutely every single person on this earth, then is it really the truth? And if that sounds like an arrogant or altogether overbearing statement to the effect of me supposing I know more than I do, quite possibly it is. But I'd go so far as to say that we very much can realize systems that do in fact better things for everyone, if not necessarily to a degree wherein it becomes a utopic society. But we can make shit just a little bit better. Little. And then also from there, kind of go, how big can we get that? That's the idea. So, dissecting the depiction of revolution is very important. Because the depiction of revolution a lot of the time is something where it's like scary and it's bad. It scares people off. In reality, it's kind of the environment that surrounds it, but that isn't the real thing. That's not what's really going on. And it's important to reflect on all of that. It's important to visit all of those ideas. Because one of the things that's going on that a lot of people don't realize, anytime that they're out there in the world engaging with their media or being just immersed in their worlds, is something called predictive programming. Predictive programming is basically the idea that you will subtly introduce themes to people through the things that they are already doing in their lives. You could see a Facebook ad over and over again, combined with suddenly seeing it inside of a store, combined with hearing about it in another way, and that would be the advertising equivalent of predictive programming. But in the same way in which advertising equivalents of predictive programming and putting things out there in the world for you to observe and then grow accustomed to can be a very effective manner of selling you things, so too can the predictive programming of simply getting you accustomed to things that are different in the world achieve more or less the same effect. You can look at the rollout of the TSA and how that incrementally went from just people being all okay, metal detector, and then we're in a national security thing, so we gotta up it, and we gotta be really there's anthrax, holy shit, we gotta be everybody's gonna die, so that means we gotta be crazy feel everybody's genitals get felt now that the anthrax is out there. Find that anthrax, give me your balls, and the TSA's basically been like that ever since. They maybe I'm just treated differently. I don't know. Anyway, the idea is that it kind of starts fairly low-key, and then it gets turned up, and that's something that you're incrementally kind of just get used to in the process of going out there and having to deal with it. That's what's going on. You get used to it as you go out there, and you have to deal with it. And eventually you're just Jesus, yeah, that's normal now. That means that people are fed, concepts within movies, magazines, and news headlines, and advertisements, and TV shows, and then once those concepts get into the heads of the general public, those once kind of sparse ideas that you'd sort of just see around, like, just it's kind of just all around, subsequently begin to unfold and emerge in the real world. This often happens without people even noticing it, and it can be a powerful tool to use or to curtail or subvert what is conventionally thought of as normal. In other words, sometimes the establishment creates what we, the people, then come to regard as normal. Even though it was created, we think it just magically appeared. Like a new idea just appears everywhere around us. We're pulled to it like a magnet, and we never really ask about how that center of gravity came to be in the first place. So, what I think a great example of predictive programming is the little-known story of how many famous musicians and bands stemmed out of the Laurel Canyon area. This wasn't simply a small, sprinkling of insignificant influence and a handful of songs or movies. Instead, it was quite possibly the deliberate manufacture from the ground up of the hippie movement itself. I'm sorry to suggest that to you if you were a hippie at one point in time yourself. I'm not saying you're in on it. Nothing like that. But it's a really interesting portion of history that's not particularly delved into or well known. And so it's important for us to understand and dissect this little known pocket of substantial influence in history. Getting into Laurel Canyon, to really talk about what sort of the implications of that are. The idea that a movement is created that would be fashionable so that it would catch on and it could be sold as intertwined with musicians and mainstream celebrities all coming up together in the same area as watched over and quite possibly groomed from the ground up by the establishment itself. Well, that's what was going on in Laurel Canyon. My very loose, very brief citation of the events that took place surrounding Laurel Canyon is straight out of the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by the late, great independent researcher Dave McGowan. Read this book. I've provided a great interview with Dave McGowan in the show notes. It was on The Antidote. I think it was actually the first show of The Antidote. And it gives you a deeper sense of what was going on here. You get to hear it from him, and he does a better job of explaining it than I do. Trust me. Check out this interview. But in this mind-blowing book, McGowan tells the story of how many, many, many famous bands, most notably of which The Doors, showed up miraculously out of the Laurel Canyon area. Jim Morrison's father was a very high-ranking Navy admiral who oversaw the Gulf of Tonkin incident. It's a pretty big incident, so it's interesting. In the case of many other bands who themselves often had high-ranking military family and blue-blooded connections that sometimes stemmed hundreds of years back. One person I think was even related to John Adams. It's that's a coincidence. I'm not saying that's anything, but it's pretty interesting that those kind of family connections end up sustaining themselves and emerging as celebrity later on. And if it happens a lot in one area, and everyone has, well, not everyone, but a lot of people have very high-ranking military family. And at the same time, some in the music scene in Laurel Canyon had little to no experience playing their own instruments. So why would you play an instrument in a band if you don't really know how to play? Well, maybe you just want to be famous, right? Okay, well, maybe it's just one of those crazy things. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to play this instrument even though I don't know how because everyone's drunk. Who cares? They'll just like the music. I don't know. But it seems strange that, you don't have any experience being in a band and then all of a sudden you're on a band and some of the best stages and one of the hottest venues. That's a lot of pressure, man, But what McGowan suggests, and quite reasonably so, is that it's almost as if some of the bands were cast rather than organically formed. And so miraculously, out of Laurel Canyon, an incredible talent pool began to grow and flow into the outside world. As those bands played and built their prominence in that area, they were able to book the hottest venues and gather unique crowds at their shows. Within those crowds were scantily clad, very freely dancing, highly flirtatious sorts of dance troupes. Hippies. The first hippies came out of Laurel Canyon by dancing to bands like The Doors, and those groups of hippies helped cement the exhibition that Laurel Canyon musicians were putting on for all of America, stoking and cultivating a broader cultural movement to take root in the hearts of the entire country's youth. Because of what was going down in Laurel Canyon, being a hippie was in fashion. So, let's really look at the stage here. You have the establishment actively spreading seeds to subvert the youth who, otherwise, they'd risk being the anti-war movement themselves, right? Wait, but you may be thinking the hippie movement was anti-war, very anti-war. That was the youth being anti-war. So if the establishment didn't want people to oppose war, then why am I suggesting that hippies were created from the ground up in order to protest war? Isn't that completely fucking contradictory and backwards? Well, hear me out. You have to understand how the situation would play out. You have to understand that a well-grounded, anti-war movement spearheaded by the most prominent or just even hard-working, progressive, or constitutionally conservative people in America at that time, that could actually be taken seriously by the relatively conservative Christian base of the American public. But a bunch of freaky kids, running around, frivolously sleeping around and throwing American cultures and traditions away completely, stoned out of their minds, trying to peddle drugs to other people's kids. No, America's not going to take that shit seriously at that time period. I mean, some people would, some ideas would break on through to the other side, but no, that shit was way too much, way too fast. Most people weren't going to be down for it. The point being, Laurel Canyon revealed the tremendous depth and sophistication that goes into creating cultural movements, convincing us that those cultural movements are strictly spontaneous and organic in their effervescence, and then through those movements that we ourselves choose to participate in, gradually adjusting the dials of what we all regard as normal, as common, and not least of all, as fashionable. It's really brilliant, extremely subtle manipulation technique that the public is largely blind to. In fact, to viewers of entertainment media, they think they're just watching entertaining movies, going to concerts, or tuning into TV shows, but in reality, something more subtle is going on. It's deeper than that. Media depiction reinforces the idea of normal for an entire population. Predictive programming effectively predicts our programming because it successfully programs predictions directly into us everywhere we go, all the time. And from that collective matrix of constant influence, we regard what we see around us as commonplace, even if it's not. Even if it's not normal at all. Simple. It's sneaky. It's underhanded. Almost impossible to spot until well after the fact. I mean, you can spot it beforehand, but it's tough sometimes, to see what people are trying to put into your brain without you noticing it. Which even in and of itself sounds like, well, why would people do that? Well, to sell you shit. One, to control, dictate, influence, or restrict the parameters of the manner in which you go about this earth, and by way of doing that, simply reaping or yielding a greater benefit in what they're willing to pursue by way of your absence. You know, if you convince people not to try, you get a lot of people out of the way without having to actually move them out of the way. They move themselves. That's the point. It's fucking control. It's manipulation. So why would anybody do that? If you're good at it, you can literally get away with controlling the entire fucking world. So that's a pretty goddamn big motivation. I don't understand why that's so difficult for people to understand, you know? It's like, it's going on all the time. It's literally what people are freaked out about Russia for. It's like, yo, this Putin guy for real? He gonna come and kill us? He all about trying to take over the world? And people are like, yeah, that's what he's like. But if you say that about the people who are actually doing that, then the media turns against you, and it's all like, no. Focus on this, like, puppet dipshit on the other side of whatever the fuck, because that person's clearly way more interesting than whatever the fuck it is we're actually supposed to be paying attention to back home. Like, oh, by the way, the shit that's going out and under from and underneath us. Like, anyway. So that gives you a little historical perspective into how psychological warfare and predictive programming can be waged against entire populations who think what's popular or trendy or fashionable just like magically appears rather than being meticulously crafted. Taking advantage of how gullible and susceptible most people are to the raw power of suggestion, to the power of advertising. Take, for example, the classic tale of how Edward Bernays, one of the founders of the public relations and advertising industry, made the breakfast of bacon and eggs a staple in America. The meal was something that people in America did eat, every once in a while, but it wasn't until after a successful advertising campaign spearheaded by Bernays that bacon and eggs became cemented in people's minds as not only normal, but the very definition of what a healthy American breakfast is. See how that works? I mean, it's advertising, yeah. But more than advertising, it's sort of just like influences and affects your feelings and your sense of nostalgia. So you take more away from it than it just being an ad. You take away a slice of what you think normal is. It's not just like, oh, I like that. It's like, oh, everybody likes that. You know? And we see that in advertising all the time. But it's way more than just advertising. That's what branding is. Because branding isn't just like a bumper sticker you slap on something or a label you etch into something. It's also the feeling of experiencing the entire world that comes with a brand. You know? And people are pretty touchy-feely about that kind of shit. Both in how brands package themselves and how when people naturally gravitate towards certain packaging. You know? So the ideas of things like that, little aspects of history that we sort of just look at and we're like, oh yeah, that's just normal. It's just always been there. You know? But is it normal? And has it always been there? How long has it been there? Why was it created? And by whom? Those are the questions. Because the food we eat, the music we listen to, the political movements we march in, and the very framework of what we regard as possible at all, it's all derived from what we perceive around us. And what we perceive around us isn't as simple as it seems, it's manufactured unbeknownst to us. Hollywood, media moguls of all sorts, advertisers, everyone has an agenda in influencing what we think of as normal. But what if you just want to know the truth? Time out from all this heavy shit of people trying to get into my brain or whatever. But what if you just want to speak and be heard on behalf of a real revolution in a real way? Peace, love, decency, being good people on the earth. Just that. That's it. Fuck the rest of it. Don't care about the ad slogans, brands, sales pitches, the fashion fads, the ideologies, the idols. I'm good. None of that matters. But what if you just want to be a good, decent human being on this earth? How do we do that if everywhere around us there are underhanded techniques being employed to hijack what we love and use it against us? How do we really realize revolution? Picking up on that question and analyzing the idea further of the thoughts and desires we have in our own minds about revolution and changing this world. And what I mean by revolution is basically just the idea of changing the systems that we currently have to make better systems that work better. You know that. So I'm going to be delving into the heart of Hollywood's depiction of revolution here today, mainly because, well, to put it simply, right now, much of how you, the viewer, currently conceive of revolution doesn't actually have anything to do with real revolution. Instead, as a society, we're sort of addicted to a simple, violent, formulaic, scripted version of what we consider revolution to be. How we think and expect revolution to look. Like, if it were to happen right now, we'd be like, oh, this is what it's going to look like. You know? Like, we have kind of a general framework of what that would look like if it happened right now. You know? Like, if you opened your window and looked at it, it'd be like, oh, it's a revolution. And you're looking at it. That we all have that. You know? But that doesn't mean that those images you have in your own mind is what real revolution would actually look like in real life, or that your conception of revolution, like what you saw out that window, would actually be beneficial if it came to happen in the real world. Instead, that formulaic script that you have in your own mind about what revolution is, like what it is actually counterproductive when applied in real life. Now that's interesting, right? You've only ever seen counterproductive, ineffective, self-destructive techniques of revolution and revolutionaries because that's the only version you've ever been shown by Hollywood. It's no coincidence, by the way, that you're only ever shown one version of revolution, which, like, to clarify, is always, always, always combat-oriented revolution in response to extreme oppression. You know, it's like good guys versus bad guys, rebels versus Imperials, like Katniss kicking ass, Neo smacking Smith into a burrito, just like, you know, like, all of that. And because of that stagnant, maladaptive, ineffective, overly simplified, all around just shitty conception of revolution that you, the viewer, probably already have drilled into your mind, we seriously need to revisit two things on the show here today. Number one, what does real-life, effective, non-violent, non-destructive, highly productive revolution on behalf of the evolution of this species actually look like? And number two, today on Conspiracy Synergy, we're going to be dissecting the art of how to fashion sedition. Okay, well, first off, what the hell is sedition? If you've never heard that word before, that's totally cool because it's not really used very often. Think of sedition as the thoughts, feelings, gestures, expressions, artworks, books, and conversations that all gradually, come to facilitate or lead to revolution. So it could be like pretty much anything could lead to start that process along, right? So let's say that there was a particularly charged event or even just a depiction of an event that people everywhere all rallied around and drew motivation from. Events like the Rodney King beating, the pepper spraying of Occupy Wall Street protesters, Tiananmen Square, like so many different examples, are all powder keg issues that triggered deeper public awareness and an outcry from the public that change is desperately needed. They trigger public awareness, and people cry sedition and intuitively want to gravitate towards revolution, but then it's like the authority steps in response. So sedition is actively pursuing and working towards that much needed change, helping to make the world better for everyone by paving the way for real revolution. Now, if you Google the word sedition, concept is phrased very differently than how I've presented it to you here and now. Yeah, I mean, I've presented it as people like becoming aware of something that's horribly wrong and then rising up in opposition to oppression, so that they can bring that awareness of what's horribly wrong to other people, build real world reform, change, revolution, and evolve, you know? The things we're supposed to be doing as good people anyway, like that. Sedition, as is defined by the establishment, is a crime because it sees the encouragement of revolution as a threat to the monopoly that the establishment holds. So in the eyes of the American government, sedition is crossing a very serious line. It's not just like talking about change or discussing the ideas that might bring about a healthy, productive, nonviolent revolution and evolution of our level of consciousness. I mean, instead, through the haze of the bubbles that exist in the establishment, perceive sedition as actively planning to overthrow authority. So it's kind of balancing on the line, like between First Amendment rights of freedom of speech versus going to meetings to discuss how to overthrow the government. In the establishment's eyes, you have every right to express your dissent, but since the state is a centralized bureaucracy, remember, a system of keeping everyone inside of those same stagnant containers and stacks of containers. Well, since that's the organizational structure of the government itself, they choose to see anyone who messes with the organizational structure of governance or of society at large as if they're a criminal. If you advocate for freedom from the pre-existing structures, the establishment labels you a criminal. And for that matter, if you dare step out of line and actually speak on behalf of disbanding or decommissioning the government or doing away with centralized bureaucracy structures altogether because they just aren't that effective and they don't really work to the betterment of everyone, it's disproportionately favorative of a select few, and we're all kind of going crazy because of it, so maybe we should stop doing that. I mean, honestly, people. Anyway, if you talk about that stuff, then you might be under some serious scrutiny by the state. Criminal cartel. Government has a monopoly of control over other people's lives because of the systems that have been created to keep us all bottled up. And as far as the government laws are concerned, you're not supposed to like mess with how society is structured, no matter what. In reality, sedition is speaking out about how to make systems better and more effective so that people can be more free, more moral, and more healthy and happy on this earth. The shit we're supposed to be doing as good people. But according to the centralized bureaucratic institutions that control other people and profit off of keeping us in bottles, to those systems, sedition is always bad. They're in control right now. They don't want to lose control. You know, that's what it's about. It's about power structures not wanting to lose control. So of course they're all like, no, don't pull on that thread, man. Like, a whole lot of shit's gonna come toppling down if you mess with it. It's like, ugh. So anyway, so that gives you a sense of the very differing opinions surrounding the idea itself. But like, where does sedition come from? You know, where does it originate? Well, no, it's just it. It can come from anyone, anywhere, anytime. You know, like as I've demonstrated, sedition can be built or manufactured and then used as propaganda. It could be like mixed in with organically effervescing sort of discontentment of we the people or popular movements. And this is done in an attempt to achieve the very same strong emotional effects that people naturally have to events, like the Rodney King beatings, you know. Only the establishment can do this deliberately to provoke people. It's done deliberately to influence what's thought of as normal, and again, it's to keep control. And that's done deliberately. Very, very much so. In a way that you can either supercharge people emotionally or you can pacify them emotionally. And when you do that, you can like goad them into reacting without thinking and then sabotage their better judgment. Just like when you're watching a movie, right? You know, it's that same kind of programming. Sedition, therefore, can be both conducive to and counterproductive towards real-world political action. You know, it's like it's all over the fucking map, and it's constantly evolving. Because of this, the cultural climate that surrounds any revolution that might take place is a 24/7 battlefield of manipulating how people feel. It's not simple. Like, it's not this happened and then that happened. It's more like, what's even going on under the surface of what we're being told? And then it all boils over and nobody's able to track it anymore. And it's so confusing. You know, it's often deliberately confusing. It's often deliberately divisive. You know, it's like Lenin said, the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. Just like with Laurel Canyon. If you create a less effective popular movement to undermine another less popular but more effective movement, then you can trick people into doing what's popular rather than what's effective. And that battlefield for your mind, like for your attention, your energy, your focus, that's where 99 out of 100 revolutions and 99 out of 100 revolutionaries are squashed before they can even start. You know, like, real revolution is evolution. Sedition is fuel for revolution. Like, do you see how that works? They keep people from getting the fuel they need to get anywhere else so that everyone has to stay inside of the bottles stacked in a pyramid that comprises the establishment. It's like the citizens of this world are being held emotionally hostage by their own governments without realizing it. It's Stockholm Syndrome. You know, it's gaslighting. Like, and it's happening all over the world to convince you that normal is the way things already are. This is not normal. I'm telling you, man, all this murder we got going on, that ain't normal. That, like, America's at war right now with a lot of people. And everyone's like, where's the anti-war movement? They're all like, oh, we ain't gonna move. What the fuck? Small bullshit. But so sedition can be something that manifests autonomously. However, every bit as often, if not more often, sedition is something that is crafted by the government, subtly suggested to people through the media in order to, like, corral them into divisive binary political beliefs and then dismantle opposition because those belief structures are ineffective to bring about positive real-world change, you know, like by tricking people into binary encampments of highly divisive, stagnant political thought, like Democrats and Republicans, you know, they're like squared off against each other. It's like they're enemies, you know. The government successfully tricks people who don't understand how the centralized infrastructure of the government really works into being foolish enough to on one side of the extreme spectrum, try and like violently overthrow the government, and the other side of the extreme spectrum to violently maintain the government. That's at all costs, those are the sides. It's like, we're going to overthrow you, we're going to murder, we're going to kill you if you try and overthrow us. And it's like, oh, that's kind of what's going on. So right now I'm going to clarify something for the record. There is no single worse premise on this earth than the idea of fighting any government or authority by using violence or destruction. It is unfathomably short-sighted.
The limitations of riots, moral questions aside, is that they cannot win, and their participants know it. Hence, rioting is not revolutionary, but reactionary, because it invites defeat. Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, the man said it himself. He understood better than anybody what it actually takes for real revolution to take hold. And then the FBI murdered him. And fast forward all of these years of people being divided. And we're more divided than ever. Because that's how the establishment's game plays out. That's how it plays us. It turns us against each other. It uses black versus white, left versus right. It all adds up to dividing us. See what I mean? Sedition has been fashioned. And that's the idea that we wear. All the viewing public considers revolution to be at its core, is fighting. That's it. People don't like fighting. So why would they like revolution? Nobody wants to fight. Can't we all get along? Well, the funny thing is that's what revolution really is. It's like, hey, can't we all get along? But people are like, no, I don't want to fight. I'd be like, well, that's what I'm saying. Let's get along. I'd be like, no, I don't want to fight. I'd be like, motherfucker, I'm trying to get along with you right now. Well, I ain't trying to fight you. It'd be like, what the fuck? That kind of, it's that kind of like you're chasing after each other and you're not really talking to each other. Our idea of revolution is not the real revolution. Our idea of revolution is the opposite of real revolution. We all think that revolution is fighting, but that's not what revolution is. Revolution is, can we all just get along? That's it. So most people, if they were to describe revolution or revolutionaries, would describe violent and profound disorder or chaos, which is kind of incredible if you think about it. Real revolution is the process of healing, growing, changing, evolving, and overcoming adversity. But the way people think of revolution is as destructive, disorderly, misguided, and unstable. It's the way in which any establishment that's trying to consolidate and retain its power would want revolutionaries to think. Like, you hear me? Like, all governments want you to think of revolution in a violent capacity. They want that to be the terms of battle, the thing that they're best at, obviously. So why do they want you to think that way? Because it's ineffective and they'll win. See what I mean? Predictive programming. If you think violence and destruction changes anything, you have been brainwashed in order to turn you violent and destructive. That's how the establishment works. It gets deep in your head before you even have the chance to think. See how brilliant that is as a subversive manipulation technique? And here you were thinking all you were doing was watching entertaining movies or watching the news, right? Nope. You were being programmed. Your emotions how you feel about what's normal. We were all programmed emotionally, basically. It's pretty messed up. Pretty messed up. Okay, now that I've discussed the ineffective, stagnant, maladaptive, disruptive, and destructive manner in which the establishment wants you to try and revolt, let's talk about some real world, actually successful revolutionary techniques so that we can get our minds right, oriented around positive change in this world, because that is a very real thing. But it's not a formula of violence and sensationalism that you expect when you go to the movies or when you turn on the news. It's not a bunch of really snazzy, sexy sales pitches. It's more just a basic understanding of what actually helps right now. So, violence is not the answer. Get it through your head. Yes. Okay. Here, important point of distinction. Revolutionary movements can reach points of conflict where they need to defend themselves. And that is perfectly acceptable. For example, the Black Panthers organized marches with rifles to demonstrate their Second Amendment right to bear arms and defend themselves. That's an example of people taking the necessary precautions to ensure that they are not defenseless. That's okay. That's important. Violence is defined as the instigation of physical force against others, but self-defense is not violence, okay? They are diametrically opposed concepts. And that's really, really important for you to understand. It's an important distinction. You have the right to defend yourself against violence. That means if someone walks up to you and punches you in the face, you have the right to use physical force to defend yourself. You can fight back. But nobody has a right to be violent. Ever. Nobody has a right to just walk up and start assaulting other people. Ever. Police do not have the right to be violent. It doesn't matter if they're wearing a shiny badge and a funny costume. That doesn't matter. They do not have that right. They have a right to defend themselves, yes, as we all do. But they do not have the right to be violent. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if they're cop. The government does not have a right to be violent. It does not matter how many votes they have. A wrong can never be made a right, no matter how much of a consensus there may be to make it so. And the Black Panthers demonstrating their God-given right to defend themselves is a perfect example of revolutionaries taking a stand without crossing the line. I mean, it may make you uncomfortable. Hell, I'd say it should. Let's be real, people. That's why the Second Amendment exists. You have the right to defend yourself against violence. While we're on the subject of Black Panther Party, I want to underscore two aspects of what they did that were profoundly important benchmarks of real revolutionary theory. And for that matter, Occupy Wall Street actually made a point of doing this as well. They actively participated in communities and made a point of transitioning the revolutionary dialogue through group meetings and then actually going out in the real world and helping people. And that's fucking huge, man. So, but that's Occupy Wall Street. So back to Black Panthers, a lot of people want to paint the Black Panthers as a radical organization that was needlessly stoking aggression. And that's kind of insane, in my opinion, because they're basically just people who were being treated without human, dignity, who'd had enough and started rising up in defense of themselves. And that defense, it wasn't only the exhibition of a right to bear arms. Far more than that, it was the leaflets that were printed to help inform people about thoughts and ideas outside of the purview of the establishment. They were liberating people's minds. And that was something that really scared the establishment. If people think, if people know how to think, a free and informed people who understand their rights, that is what the establishment is really scared of. Another way in which the Panthers, like in which the Black Panthers changed the game, they hosted the school lunch program. They fed and clothed those people in the community who needed it most. They looked after each other. Of course, the go-to figure in most people's minds to represent successful protest against all odds is that of Mahatma Gandhi in gaining Indian independence. And the reason people think of him in that way is because he really did embody one of the most powerful incarnations of peaceful, non-violent resistance that has ever been seen on this earth. He and those who followed in his footsteps, they gave the perspective that brought peace in times of civil war. And he sacrificed so much in the ways that he did so that the Indian people could finally be free from their long-standing oppressors, those who had divided and conquered them for so long. Gandhi, not unlike many, many revolutionaries before and after him, advocated on behalf of sedition. But even with those sacrifices, India to this day isn't healed from the scars of its colonial past, and, for that matter, neither is America. So all of the fights we've had for freedom, we're still not free. Take the examples of our revolutionaries, even if you're thinking of a depiction in which revolution has been done successfully, are we free right now? No. So the depictions don't align with the reality. And our successful revolutionaries were only a part of a continuing story. And it takes more time for that story to evolve and to unfold and to take root in reality in a real way that doesn't necessarily look like how we've been programmed to think of it. And it takes real revolution to overcome those scars. And real revolution doesn't just happen for a brief period and then wash away in the tides. No. Real revolution never stops because evolution never stops. And in the modern era, I'd argue that the idea of revolution has sped up so quickly that we're not able to perceive individual revolutions anymore. Instead, it's all coming together in one constant stream, like images in a video. That's the environment. That's the environment of revolution today. And that's why predictive programming works as well as it does. The movie ends, the lights come back on, and we stay stagnant, waiting to see those stories unfold in real life, blind to how we've been blindfolded. Yeah, and it's a vicious cycle. And we keep going back into it, because these are conversations that we need to have. So those are some important concepts to consider when you approach the idea of what real world revolution is. As always, there's a shirt that goes along with today's episode. This shirt was designed in the likeness of the logo for the film Fight Club. Yeah, this sucker. Yeah, Fight Club, man. Okay, so this movie, it's a brilliant film. It shows how severe emotional repression can result in mental illness and primal compensatory male bravado turned into juvenile delinquent behavior. And that's why in the movie, the first two rules of Fight Club are don't talk about Fight Club. You mean not having the adult conversations we desperately need to have about our toxic, violent tendencies all over the world and how shitty we're feeling kind of all the time, and it's so bad you just want to punch something, and hey, maybe that can be great if you're consenting to it, but hey, later they become a terrorist organization, so too far, Yeah. Anyway, it's a brilliant film. And it can be viewed in a number of different ways. And that makes it even better. And it offers some extraordinarily important insights into how our emotions bottle up and erupt outwardly. So today's shirt takes that paradigm of that classic film and completely turns it on its head by valuing and respecting our hearts equally as much as we endeavor to free our minds. So, as always, thank you for tuning in. My name's Tees, Teacher of Peace. Pleasure to be on this rock with y'all, and I cannot wait to see how we manage to change it for the better together. Till next time, this has been another episode of Conspiracy Synergy. Welcome to the rabbit hole, and keep digging.